Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. We will just give another second or two so more people can join, and we will start this webinar. Okay, let's start. Good morning, good afternoon again, to everyone, and welcome to the second part of our webinar series in partnership with Global Relay. My name is Gonzalo. I work for Refinitiv, and I will be your moderator today. Before moving forward, I just wanted to highlight some key rules for the webinar. This is a listen-in only webinar, and you can only use your laptop, PC, voice controls to manage volume. You can submit questions via the Q&A chat box. You can use the widgets at the bottom to discover the platform features, and the slide deck and recording will be circulated after the webinar. Excuse me. Today, we will be exploring how organizations are managing higher scrutiny and pressure from regulators on their trading and communications in order to meet global and regional regulatory requirements while being compliant and efficient. We have a real nice agenda where we'll start with introduction, and we'll then move forward to regulatory compliance and e-coms and what are the key factors to take in consideration. We will be speaking about the FX Global Code, best practice on conduct and e-coms, and how to manage regulatory requirements in a compliant way. After that, we will open the session for a Q&A, which, as I mentioned previously, you can do through your chat, and then we will have some closing remarks. To help us go through these topics, we have today with us Reshna Shah, Director of Regulatory Reporting at Refinitiv, Vince Demasi, Regional Performance Director for EMEA, Remington Jarvis, Business Development for Global Relay, Sachin Tsunami, Performance Director for Asia, and myself. As a last note, before moving towards the topics we will be discussing, I just wanted to highlight the Global Relay Refinitiv partnership and for how many years we have been working together on and how our customers rely on this partnership for compliance message archiving. We have been together for 13 years, and it's a very strong partnership, and we definitely want to be participating in more webinars together. So let's start, and I will start with the first part. We will start with the recap, and I will ask Vince, can you please provide us a recap on the last webinar?
Yes, thanks, Gonzalo, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I would say in our previous conversation, we covered the direct link between the expansion of e-coms and the related compliance and surveillance risks. We all agreed on the key vectors of e-coms evolution. We exchange more data, we do it quicker, at faster velocity and speed. We leverage a wider variety of tools and applications. And yes, privacy and security have always been a paramount. Now, the working from home new paradigm triggered by COVID-19 has simply accelerated some of those dynamics and patterns and stressed the potential vulnerability of those interconnections with corporations and financial market players pushed to design, review, and update their policies when it comes to surveillance, monitoring, and archiving of electronic communications from chats to voice, from mobile to text messaging and WhatsApp. So, in essence, an increased usage of electronic communication channels translates into more, I would say, new risks to be managed. And during our first webinar, we asked some questions to our attendees. And today, we want to share some of those answers with you. And Remington, we were together on that first conversation. What are your thoughts based on the answers we have collected from our attendees in the previous conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Vince, and welcome everyone. I think we didn't find the answers incredibly surprising, but they were interesting nonetheless. The last webinar was only a couple months into COVID or working from home, and everyone was still responding and adjusting to the new reality. It wasn't surprising to find that technology was the biggest challenge in this, and it was one of these items which, as people shifted to a completely different way of working from their home office, no longer surrounded by their colleagues, they had to lean on new technology and new media in order to actually accomplish their work. And in this way, technology was a burden for those that worked in technology or in compliance, trying to make sure that their systems were all being monitored, while at the same time a blessing to those and being able to work from home. Yeah, it was all extremely interesting, and we just talked about how firms can let their employees embrace new technology, embrace new messaging systems in order to work from home, and while also being strategic and being smart, so that these systems are monitored so that they fit into the current compliance framework that companies are using.
No, thanks for that. And moving forward, like from the last webinar, we actually do have like a question for our audience, and it's related to as a consequence of what we were discussing on the first webinar, and we wanted to assess your feelings around like have your strategies on record keeping and archive considerably changed as a consequence of increased regulatory pressure and scrutiny. I will wait a couple of seconds for the audience to respond. Yeah, let's see if we have like some answers. Yes, so I will ask Vince, what do you have to say around these responses?
Yeah, thanks, Gonzalo. Well, looking at the results, I would say that this distribution does reflect a very common pattern in financial markets, where market participants in the last 10 years have been dealing with a constant increase of regulatory pressure, so more rules and more obligations to deal with. As a kind of, I would say, post-traumatic remedy after the 2008 global financial crisis. More rules have been designed and activated across several jurisdictions, and those new directives and regulations do translate into a new set of data to be stored, verified, archived, and reported, with market players encouraged to move their trading activity into electronic venues and platforms more and more. The reason for that is extremely simple. If you really want to control a complex ecosystem, you need more data points with increased granularity. The aim is to achieve a more transparent market overall, and transparency is indeed the real fil rouge of such regulatory push, and does represent the real goal to be achieved if we accept the equation of more transparent markets translating into safer, more robust and efficient ecosystem. And indeed, behind all of the new transparency obligations we have to deal with, from Dodd-Frank to MiFID II, from market abuse to FRTB and more, the objective is to better read the market, to trace every single move and deal we do on the market. With that traceability, allowing better understanding of risk concentrations, and so actively contributing to a safer market, able to resist to a potential new crisis or a black swan. Now, within this new trend driven by transparency and traceability objectives, electronic communications cannot be exempt, and the relevance that collaboration tools have recently gained in financial markets workflows is an implicit demand for improved ability to capture, normalize, archive, analyze, and predict behaviors to avoid a wide set of risks from operational to reputational ones. And within transparency obligations, I would say record-keeping requirements are very popular across all jurisdictions. Now, based on your experience, Reshna, what are your thoughts on record keeping and how they have developed so far across jurisdictions?
Thanks, Vince. So if we take a look at ESMA and, who's been leading in terms of the e-communication regulations, we can see that in the ESMA Q&A, there are guidances around internal telephone conversations and e-communications needing to be recorded relating to transmission of orders, execution of orders on behalf of clients, and also dealing on your own account, which then lead you to be subject to MiFID II rules on record keeping. And we see that ESMA is expecting firms to record all telephone conversations and communications, including fax, email, SMS, chat, instant messaging, and mobile device applications. And that kind of leads to a thread in the other regulations as well, where we start to see, with CFTC, ASIC, MAS, HKMA, all of them following this kind of thread of record keeping, with folks operating in these jurisdictions at different stages of adopting this regulation.
Sachin, do you have thanks for that. Thanks, Vincent and Arashna. Sachin, do you have any commentary around more focus on the Asia regulations?
Thanks, Gonzalo. Yes, indeed. I mean, very interestingly, Bank Negara in Malaysia, they released the code of conduct in April 2020 this year. And if I look at Part F, it talks about traceability, auditing, and record keeping. And that's particularly directed towards phone conversations and electronic messages. It is not just Bank Negara, but a wide number of regulators and the central banks in Asia-Pacific regions are enforcing those directives. And in certain cases, these are also the best practice principles which are observed. Notably amongst them, another one would be Reserve Bank of India. They released what is known as the Market Abuse Directive in March 2019, which alludes to the same principles of record keeping.
No, definitely. Thanks for that. And as a consequence of this as well, we have a best practice guidance, which I think is relevant for us to talk, which is around the FX Global Code. And before moving into it, we have another poll question for the audience. Where is your organization in the FX Global Code adoption journey? I will give a couple of seconds so people can vote. Sorry, I pressed too far. So we have some very interesting results. Vince, do you care to provide some commentary around this?
Yes, Gonzalo, it's interesting, to see the distribution of those answers, and there is a good chunk of the population who responded, still hasn't started or is in early stages of the FX Code adoption. I would say here that the FX Global Code is kind of a key step forward in enabling that concept of the better and more transparent culture of trading and the transparency I was covering before. The introduction of new set of principles and adoption into the trading workflow of each market participant is not an easy switch-on exercise. It's not simply a declaration to be signed to tick a box. It triggers some motion and potentially some changes and updates to well-established practices. So it takes time, but it's definitely the right path to follow. We all know life is not all about rules, and whatever the size and the kind of those rules are, any event or investment decision is linked to our human nature, to our ethics and conduct. So any attempt to protect the market from a new crisis and to make it safer, I would say, and more efficient, cannot underestimate the power of the underlying culture and set of values. Conduct can indeed be considered as the glue that keeps, if you allow me this, the glue that keeps together the nice bricks that we place together, regulations, to protect us from a new wave of financial crisis. Without that glue of conduct and ethics, those bricks can be easily pulled down. Now, the global foreign exchange market players pushed this concept forward and promoted the introduction and adoption of the FX Global Code, a set of global principles of good practice in the FX market, developed to provide simply clear guidelines and to promote the integrity and effective functioning of the market. And it's obviously a code, so it doesn't impose any legal or regulatory obligation on market participants. But it plays a key role since introduction a few years ago in 2017 with the first version. As a company, Refinitiv adhered to the code itself, that is indeed built on 6 principles: ethics, governance, information sharing, execution, risk management and compliance, and confirmation and settlement. And when it comes to ethics and I would say information sharing, there is an obvious touch point with e-communications, electronic comms, and those channels. Let's deep dive a little bit those key principles in the FX Global Code. Principle 2 is all about the common interest of all market participants to maintain the highest standards of conduct and professionalism. The Principle 23 goes more in detail and reminds how important it is for market participants to provide employees, your employees, with clear guidance on approved modes and channels of communications. I think here the point is to define and design the policy of the bank, or the company, or the organization on what to be used and how. And again, as we mentioned before, market participants should communicate with each other through approved methods of communication that allow for that traceability, auditing, record keeping, and access control. Specifically on information sharing, there is also a dedicated set of principles on how to properly communicate and some illustrative examples on how to share information and provide market color. I think we can all agree that beside the statement of those values, the learning that you can provide to sales and traders on both company values and the code itself, it remains crucial to be able to capture their flows of communications across the several applications we currently use or we allow in our organization, to both be able to face an investigation better and prevent any potential misconduct case before those take place, analyzing patterns, detecting behaviors in advance. And finally, Principle 33 is about having proper business continuity plans, very popular in the COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 environment, that can be implemented quickly and effectively if and when a large-scale event prevents access to liquidity, trading, and other critical services. And compliance and surveillance are part of that subset of critical services whose continuity needs to be achieved with, especially when volatility picks up and the market goes crazy, with agile solutions that allow low or almost zero IT footprint and possibility to easily connect from a remote location from your home. So once again, transparency and traceability are the key variables of that equation, balancing a wider set of collaboration tools that we use in our organization and the embedded additional risks that needs to be managed because of the evolution of e-commerce channels and the way they are used in the financial ecosystem. And just as a conclusion here, you were covering the FX Global Code. There are codes of conduct for money market and for precious metals as well. And this is an interesting trend, which is kind of shaping and reshaping the market, not just around rules, but also pressing the button of the relevance of the human nature, the conducts, the ethics in trading environment, I would say, Gonzalo.
Yeah, no, definitely. And thanks for that comment. Sachin, do you have anything else to add on this
So
section?
just sure, Gonzalo. I mean, just echoing the same sentiments as what Vince mentioned. If you look from an Asia perspective, the central banks in many of the jurisdictions are taking a very proactive approach, starting off with MAS. So MAS is actually encouraging both the sell-side institutions and the buy-side institutions now to adopt the code of conduct. The same goes with RBI in Australia, and it's across the spectrum, again with HKMA and DMA in Hong Kong, with Bank of Japan, and in India. So in reality, I see this as a set of best practice principles which are adopted across geographies, across countries here in APAC as well as globally.
No, and thanks for that, Sachin. I completely agree. There has been like a lot of regulations that are creating challenges to organizations, and especially how they respond to that. And to keep moving forward with that, we do have another poll question, which will lead to. We want to understand what challenge like your organization has been facing like for the last couple of months, especially under like all the stress that we have seen due to the COVID and all of that. So what has been the biggest challenge to your organization? I'll give a couple more seconds. Yeah. And so we have a very balanced responses here. Remy, I will ask for your feedback and ask for your feedback here and see what do you have to say for these results. Very extremely balanced ones.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting and really goes to show where people are feeling the pressure. Every day we get questions about different regional regulations and how to tie them in with existing technology. Does a company choose to go with a more siloed approach where each office is in charge of its own employees, its own regulation, and its own technology to meet that? Or do you want to go with a wider global approach? And what's the appropriate mix between experts that can speak to regulations and technology, and where do you put your cost? Do you spend it on trying to precisely understand every single regulation and make sure you have a unique solution, or do you spend it on a wider scope of technology and cast a wider net?
Sorry for that. I was on mute. No, thanks for your commentary here. And how can we address these challenges, Remy? So what do we have to do in order to ensure that we are addressing this challenge in a compliance and efficient way, and still not like losing like our workflows, like not increasing costs, not increasing like more, not adding more challenges to our organization?
Yeah, great question. I mean, at heart, I'm a technology guy, and I really believe that smart technology, when it's run well, can solve almost all of these issues that pop up. And that's actually where a partnership between Global Relay and Refinitiv and the introduction of the Refinitiv Compliance Archive comes into play as just an extremely powerful tool to use either siloed or globally across your organization to start meeting some of these needs and knock a couple of these challenges out of the park. When we talk about a comprehensive surveillance solution, we're talking about something that's able to meet different regulations. It's able to adjust the way that it looks at data, whether it's using behavioral analytics or lexicons or flagging rules, that it's able to not just look at a single regulation like the FCA's requirements or MiFID, but rather able to easily adjust and point different rules at different users based off their location. Now you can have a single tool, you can have your data in a single place while covering a wide scope of users. And the same thing when we talk about a consolidated archive, that's taking a look at all of the different message types, all the different mediums your employees use to communicate, from email primarily, but moving into instant message systems, new collaboration tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams, phone calls, all the way down to these challenging systems like WhatsApp or WeChat. Getting all of your employees' data into a single place, running a surveillance solution over that really just gives you the upper edge and lets you tackle these issues confidently. And that's also where cloud-based scalability comes into play. Trying to tackle these issues on-premise or building your own solutions to try to connect to these systems, download data, get it on-premise, issues constantly pop up around how to get this data and APIs. So, for instance, Microsoft and Microsoft Teams is just a massive new platform that has wide engagement with a constantly updating API that every couple of weeks they release new features, and it takes development work to make sure you're capturing it all. Just moving on to the next slide. This is an example of a Microsoft Teams message when it's pulled into the Refinitiv Compliance Archive. Really, this is plugged straight in from an API. It's downloaded, and then the goal is to make sure that it's as readable and usable for a compliance officer as possible, that they can take a single look at this message and understand what's going on, who took part in this chat, what are they talking about. Compliance officers' time is valuable. They can't spend time moving between different systems to pull up different messages and compare them side by side, or see, after this Microsoft Teams message was the end result an email, I have to go into a new system, open up a new product, and look at emails around this time frame. Just being able to see all of these messages side by side, and this is an example of a timeline of a consolidated archive, a single user's messages across a day, depending on the system they were using. So for a compliance officer to easily be able to open this up, find the message that they're looking for, understand when their employee got into the office and started to email, at what point he logged into Refinitiv Messenger and started to discuss on that platform, when those FXT dealing conversations started to take place. A consolidated archive can really just solve a lot of these problems. And we've seen historically over the past 10 years how at the same time a cloud vendor and cloud-based solution just allows for flexibility, but also cost cutting. The total cost of ownership on things such as cloud systems just ends up being significantly lower, because you don't need to spend the resources to constantly develop, to buy new hardware, to forecast. As soon as a new message type hits the market, the ability just to scale up, add it to an existing system confidently is really invaluable to help meet all of these local regulations wherever they pop up. Back to you, Gonzalo.
No, thanks for me, and it's quite interesting. I would also like to hear from Vince and Sachin, like, what's your feedback on how to address these challenges that we have been mentioning throughout the webinar?
I think that was, an incredibly interesting illustration of how Refinitiv Compliance Archive can solve so many of the challenges we mentioned before when it comes to surveillance and electronic communication. The concept itself of a consolidated archive matches the requirement for more openness of your systems. So here we need to differentiate between possibly a previous paradigm with different databases for different data sources, with the advantages of having one single entry that allows you, as Remington brilliantly described, to compare, to analyze. Why is there a concentration of those 2-3 collaboration tools in terms of volume just before that event, just before that fixing, or just with those counterparties? So that is a clear advantage. I would say that an open, agnostic, fully hosted surveillance solution can really be the answer. And beside the storage itself, the value generation process out of those systems is enabled by those advanced analytics. Exactly to the point I mentioned before, to observe, to analyze, to detect behaviors across the wider set of e-coms and collaboration tools that the financial markets are using today. Including Refinitiv conversational dealing that is actually part of this and is a key asset if we stay within the foreign exchange market. That would be my comment, Gonzalo. Yeah.
Sachin, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think the biggest benefit for any financial institution would be to look at solution which can take into account a variety of communication channels, or archive as many communication channels as possible. Because if you have, as Remy mentioned, fragmented sources to identify data points, it might lead to a waste of time and may not be able to, in many cases, detect any sort of red flags. So having a consolidated source, venue agnostic, would help the organizations. Gonzalo, back to you.
Sorry, it was on mute here. Thanks for everyone for your comments on how we can address these challenges. I think at this point we will move to the Q&A, as we have been receiving a lot of questions on our chat. And let me go through them. I will start with one question that I just see, and I will direct this to you, Rashna. How important is reporting and tracking at these current times?
Thanks, Gonzalo. So reporting and tracking is very important in these times we all find ourselves in, because as we talked earlier, the pandemic has caused a lot of upheaval with companies having to move staff in relatively short space of time to work from home, and out of sight, out of mind kind of appears there. But it's really important that the front office, back office and compliance teams are still continuing to monitor and report and track the activities, because the regulators are not going to, give any leeways on this. The regulation is still there. We still need to adhere to it. There are some relief measures, being talked about, and guidance coming out in Q&A, where it is impossible to track, for example, telephone conversations on instructions received through the phone when staff are working from home. But even in those cases, there are measures that are expected to be in place, such as following up with emails with the order details about the customer, and also ensuring that there's proper verification of the identity of the person that you're talking to on the phone taking the order. So it is really important to keep continuing these efforts to, track, store, monitor, so that later, these items are all searchable, because they could be a request for information at any time, in this period as well. And so firms do need to be ready to respond in a timely manner as well to those information requests, to avoid having, penalties and fines later.
Thanks for that, Rashna. We have another question here is, are you expecting the regulatory push to slow down in the next coming months? Don't we have enough rules already? Sachin, do you want to comment on this?
As Rashna mentioned, there are some, leeway has been given, for the lack of better words. They've been postponed, but I don't see personally any of the regulators backing down from imposing those regulations on the financial firms. Contrary to that is there are certain regulators in South Asia that I know for as a matter of fact who are looking at imposing certain other regulations when it comes to monitoring of the e-com communications when the traders are working from home. Also, there are certain regulators in the ASEAN regions who are imposing or will be imposing similar regulations on the financial institutions under their jurisdictions. However, it is yet to be seen when those regulations come into effect. Speaking to some of them, I feel it is towards the last quarter of this year.
Thanks for that. There's another question coming here.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
please,
Gonzalo,
Vince.
Yeah, if I can on the regulatory
Of course.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I definitely agree with Reshna and Sachin. I would say that I think we all agree there is enough on the plate when it comes to regulatory requirements, right? So, and there are new ones just landing now, right? Like SFDR and FRTB coming later. And the layering of all those requirements does not come easy and cheap. My expectation would be that we can possibly not see an increase in new rules, brand new rules, directives and regulations in the same way we experienced it in the last 5-7 years. But definitely, competent authorities may increase the level of scrutiny on the existing ones and possibly rethink the full architecture of reporting to harmonize and potentially simplify. But I would say maybe less new rules, but increased level of scrutiny on the existing ones.
Yeah, so it means like much more pressure from regulators, and then at the same time, there's a need to kind of like comply with global frameworks plus regional, which adds on to the challenges, I would say. There's other questions that are coming here, like, and I will ask Remy, especially like when it comes like what tools, channels can be monitored. So, for example, like Teams, Zoom, WhatsApp, WeChat, and all of that. So, Remy, can you tell us, like, what all this is asking, like, what's the benefit for banks or financial institutions to monitor these type of channels, and are there like any cost reductions? How easy it is for them like to track this? So, can you please provide some feedback there?
Yeah, great question, Gonzalo. I mean, overall, the goal of a consolidated archive is to be a single true source of business communications for your company. So it's first of all up to compliance and risk to decide what systems are they going to monitor. But there's some that are just naturally they're not questioned. So email. Even Microsoft Teams, phone calls, these things are popping up more and more. They're being used in business, and they're also starting to be abused, and that's where issues can start to show up. And now there's a requirement to start holding on to these message types. Each of these systems likely includes some level of native archiving that's inbuilt, where it will store the data for longer, and maybe give a single admin access to a set of data within the system. But the goal of a consolidated archive is a cloud-based repository that pulls in all of this data from across your firm. So imagine globally, all of your emails, all of your phone calls, your Microsoft Teams, your text messages, whatever your employees are using to communicate, plugging into these systems, downloading it, and not just then storing it in a dumb archive that just kind of holds the data and doesn't do much, but really adding intelligence around that data stream as well. We're talking about mapping users to their physical location, mapping users to their desk, mapping message types to certain users, separating all that data then by retention term, and providing really deep insights into it. So yes, there very likely is a requirement if your business is using these as message types to use it.
Yep.
There's a decision that needs to be made by compliance and risk on what to say no to. Maybe WhatsApp, maybe WeChat are just too extreme, and compliance is going to simply do a block on the company and say no, nobody's allowed to use WhatsApp for work purposes. But if they get pushback and if there is a decision in the business, no, we need to use WhatsApp to talk to our customers, or we need to use WeChat to do business, then having a cloud-based vendor that's able to easily adapt, plug into these solutions, get the data and get it into your archive is really the way to go.
Oh, thanks for that. And there's another question here, Remy. Like, how easy it is to pull up these records that you were just mentioning, covering like the trade and all the different media events that relate to that trade?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work around trade reconstruction. The nice thing is, once all of that data is in a single system, it's very easily searchable, just either by users or by keywords. So if you understand that a certain user did a trade at 8 a.m. on June 30th, opening up that timeline, which I was just showing earlier, and saying, okay, zooming into 8 a.m. there and starting to take a look at those messages, and then filtering out what's noise, filtering out the communication that isn't actually about that trade. And I mean, with the Refinitiv Compliance Archive, it's just a matter of minutes until you can pull up every single email, phone call, Microsoft Teams message, and ticket around a trade, have it all displayed for you on a timeline, understand who took part in that, who was asked, when each piece of communication went in and out of the firm. Massively easy in a consolidated archive. On the flip side, it's a large challenge in a non-consolidated archive. If you have siloed solutions, or your data is split by message type, where your emails is stored on maybe an enterprise vault system, your Teams is stored over at Microsoft, your phone calls are stored on tape drives in a basement somewhere, that becomes incredibly difficult to put together an idea of who said what when and everything, because you actually have to approach each of these systems, ask for a set of data that can take hours to days to get that data back before you can then upload it to a consolidated system and actually start to filter through that.
No, thanks for that, definitely. So I will do like one last question before we go into final remarks here. So as more and more like companies are like tracking like messaging service such as WhatsApp, WeChat, etc. Like, aside from the regulatory requirements, what would be the value of doing them for financial institution? Is the use of those means of communication mean more business or cost reduction? Vince, do you care to share your thoughts here?
Well, definitely, yes. And thanks for the question. I would say that rules are important and it's not an option, meaning we need to comply with those rules, regulations, and directives. Then there is another component, which is what we mentioned about the ethics and the conduct and the principles that are at the very heart of your trading culture in an organization, in a bank, in a corporation. And there is a source of competitive advantage that can be extracted from adopting and making, those statements public, that you have adopted a specific code of conduct, right? So that you comply with certain principles, and you expect your counterparties, your liquidity providers to adhere to the same level and to the same, let's say, principles when it comes to trading and the conduct behind. And this is I would say, a positive flow that can improve the market and the transparency and the safety of the financial market itself. Being able to record and store and archive and analyze those conversations and electronic communications, even above, and beyond rules and even conducts, and ethics, can really be a source of advantage. I mean, think about a corporation in pharma or in any other industry was willing to protect intellectual property rights and really wants to make sure everything is kept with the right level of confidentiality and protection. Think about the power to reduce the potential number of misconduct cases if you have a system in place. So it's kind of an insurance policy against what can happen. And obviously you can detect behaviors not just to avoid misconduct, but also to improve your policies, to keep monitoring the way you act in the market and in your industry and with your industry bodies and authorities. That would be my comment on that, Gonzalo.
No, thanks for that. I think we'll have time, like, just for one last question, as it's a very interesting question. The cloud-based solution is very attractive, but there are important questions. Is how many regulators or Main Street players are using these reliably and consistently, and how are they accepted? Remy or Vince, Reshna, do you care to respond to this one?
Well, my first initial comment, and then possibly Remy can add something from his experience, is that obviously the scenario is pretty different across different jurisdictions, and there is also a big difference between a fully hosted or a cloud or a private or a public cloud environment that you can leverage. Definitely, from an authority regulator's point of view, the objective is obviously and always the one to protect the investor, to make sure that there are not abuses in the market and that there is no exposure to data or sensible information when or damages resulting from potential misuse or problems happening in an environment that is not local. But we also see a big trend in the adoption of fully hosted systems, because it really impacts and improves your operations when it comes to your green policies, when it comes to your total cost of ownership of your solutions, when it comes to the opportunity you have to redirect your resources and efforts and investments into areas that requires more attention, more human intervention, and just delegate and outsource some of those into a fully hosted or a private cloud or a public cloud environment. So we see different attitudes across several jurisdictions, but we cannot neglect the trend. We are witnessing this trend to adopt more and more a fully hosted system that can leverage technology at max.
No, thanks for that. So I think for now we will finalize the Q&A, and we will move to final commentary. And I will ask Reshna. And first of all, I want to thank everyone for all the questions. Very interesting questions on the audience and very engaged audience, which is always nice to have. Reshna, do you care to provide a 1 minute final comments on the webinar?
Yeah, sure. Thanks everyone for joining. And yes, it's been an interesting set of observations and commentary as we've been moving along the webinar. My final kind of stay on this would be e-coms are here to stay, and they're very important in the financial markets. And across all the jurisdictions, there's a plethora of regulations in place. The challenge has been how to improve our surveillance and regulatory responses to these requirements. And also very important to ensure that our staff who are working in these conditions at the moment, working from home, understand what is expected from them in terms of conduct and ethics at all times. So yeah, I would end on that note, Gonzalo.
Oh, thank you, Reshna. And Vince, do you want to provide some final comments?
Well, my final comment would be that, very simply, whether is it driven by regulatory requirements or conduct principles, the relevance of adopting a proper surveillance solution for e-coms is key, and it's inevitably linked to the crucial role e-coms and collaboration tools play in financial markets. It's not just a matter of better responding to an investigation or to store, archive, or to comply with regulations that we mentioned being not an option, but also a great opportunity to ensure an organization adheres and continues adhering to relevant rules, ethics, and conduct values for its industry. And our Refinitiv Compliance Archive contributes to this target. And thanks, everybody, for the interesting questions you raised.
Thank you, Vince. Remy, do you care to provide any final comments?
No, just a little. I think Vince and Reshna brought it up and really hit the ball out of the park with the summary. We're talking about a extremely complicated subject in any region, and then when you start to look globally at all of the different regions and regulations that may affect, it just becomes more and more complicated exponentially. But I'm a big fan in the belief that technology is either a burden or a massive benefit to a company, and using the correct vendor at this point in the journey, a vendor that can be trusted, has the pedigree behind it, that knows the industry in and out and has lived in the industry, can really just go a long way to making sure that you can really knock this whole challenge out of the park and tackle anything, and not only that, but future-proof yourself. Not just about today's regulations, but the regulations that are coming down the pipe, and not just with today's technology, but new technology as it adapts.
No, thanks for that, Remy. Unfortunately, Sachin is having like some technical issues, and so and then we will not be able to provide some final commentary. So moving forward, thank you everyone for attending this webinar. It was really interesting to hear from our panel around like the monitoring challenges that we're having, plus the regulatory pressure that all organizations are suffering from global requirements to regional requirements, and how there are tools out there that can help companies and organizations to solve this issue in an efficient and compliant way. As before finishing, I just really want to say again, like, thank you. Wanted to highlight we're going to be doing like the third part of the webinar series in late July, and we will send the invite very soon. There's also a report speaking around the managing of e-communications in the fragmented area going live in July. And for more information or any type of requirement that you have, just visit our website or contact your account manager. And thank you once again, and speak to you soon.
Thank you, Gonzalo, and everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, Gonzalo. Thanks, Vince. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.